Chess is split into three phases: the opening, the middle game, and the endgame. Endgames can be a little bit more boring and even mysterious to study, but you absolutely should. Why? Because endgames are theoretical. That means they're solved. If a position is winning and you learn the technique, you're going to win 100% of the time. If an endgame is drawn or a little bit tricky to win for the other side, you might draw rather than losing. In this video, I'm going to teach you the proper technique for king and pawn endgames. At the end, I will tell you my favorite endgames book. I've put timestamps on the video player for every technique you'll have to learn. Nothing else to say. Let's go. We're going to kick things off with a very, very fundamental basis of king and pawn endgames. The pawn is trying to promote and become a rook or a queen, because you cannot win with just king and bishop or king and knight. So, I put a very easy example here. If it's white's move, white will push, black will try to get our pawn, white will push, black will try to get our pawn, white will push, and black is not in time. We make the queen, and hopefully we learn how to win this position. We know how to win this position. However, if the black king is still on the square, but in the initial position, it's not white to move, and it's black to move, black has now entered what's called the square. The square is a little geometric kind of understanding of where the defending king has to be to stop a passed pawn. The way you figure out where a square should be is you see how many squares, or I guess how many spots until promotion, and you draw an equivalent amount to the other side. And you do this. So what this means is that if the black king enters the square in time, the black king will stop the pawn. So that's the very, very first concept. You're going to get endgames where the pawn can run or the king. If the king can stop you, be very careful. Okay? Be very, very careful with just pushing your pawn and not thinking. So if black moves to e5, black enters the square. However, if in the initial position it's white to move, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and the black king, even on this move, will not be able to enter the necessary square to stop the pawn. So that's number one, okay? That is an absolutely basic example, and we need to get this out of the way, because we need to... Why is this important, okay? Like, why are we even studying king and pawn endgames? Because you're going to get positions like this. This is the most famous position all of king and pawn endgames. This is the one that you will spend the most time on in this video. Don't click anything. Don't learn this. Don't run away from it. Okay, you're going to get this position, and someone's going to tell you, is white winning or is this a draw? And the answer is, as long as the pawn is between B and G, there are winning chances. If it's her A or an H pawn, you will find out in a few minutes why that's basically always a draw, as long as the defending king is close. Of course, it's also important to note, if the king is like over here, it's a very easy win. So first things first, the defending side is at least close to the pawn, and really in front of it is the most important. We're going to start with it being black's move in this position. Right now, white has played the move king to e3 and is doing something called opposition to the black king. That means you're opposing the black king, you are staring straight at it, you're saying, make a move, do something. So the winning technique here, if it's black's move, white is winning. And we'll learn in a few minutes why, if it's white's move, it's a draw. So the black king will give way to the white king. If the black king goes straight back, then we continue to march the king down and implement the same technique that you're about to learn. So let's say the king gives way. We now do something called outflanking. We move our king out of the way to take control of these squares, to open the path for our pawn. Again, if the black king ends up on a square to try to see our pawn, we do opposition again. If the king just goes straight back, cardinal sin of this endgame, your pawn should never be side by side with your king, and definitely not in front of it. Like, almost never side by side, and definitely not in front. Your king will escort the pawn. It is this security escort to your pawn. Do not march the pawn in front of your king. You won't win. What you need to do is continue to create a little bit of distance for this pawn. Side defense by black never works, because again, now you can push and the king cannot get back in time. Now you put, hey, I know it's a check. I said nothing side by side, right? King escorts. It's about controlling the squares, ensuring a safe passage of the pawn to the end of the board. So side defense is not a thing. Now, when you can push your pawn is as long as it's still behind the king. Okay? Still behind the king. Why? Because now another opposition. If the second the king looks at our pawn, we say, no way. If the king goes here, we outflank in the other direction to maintain the squares here. Side defense is not a thing. All right? And we can do the exact same thing here. We can push and then get in front, or even we can just go like this. So the king guides the way, right? We need to create the situation where the defending side has to skedaddle, get out, right, left, something, so that we can create the outflank. If we go back to the starting position, we say, well, Levy, you said it's black's move here, right? What if it's white's move? Like, what if black just got us in opposition? The way you defend this now is, I can even probably flip this, okay? How do you defend this? White king moves out of the way. You follow that king! Continue to get in its face. Why? Because if the pawn moves up, it's in front of the king. We already know this is a draw. How do we draw it? Stay in front of the pawn. Okay? And when it's time to go backwards, where do you go? In front of the pawn. Why? Because you anticipate where the king will go, and you get in front of that king. Push in front of the pawn. Behind, so you maintain vision. And you don't follow the king every single time. You only follow the king if you cannot touch the pawn again. As long as the king coming back to the pawn is allowed, you do it. You go boop, 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 until the white king says, no more of this boop, boop, boop. No, you can't come closer. So you get in front of the king again. And this process will go all the way down here. And this is where you gotta remember this is what you do. And you gotta remember you don't go here. You need to stay in front of this pawn or you're gonna lose this game. And it's not gonna work. So that's the technique for the defense. And that's the technique for the offense. Now, you are not, this is a very kind of like raw elementary level fundamental starting position. If we go all the way back and we flip it to the offensive side, the key is getting this opposition in the first place. How do you even like figure this out in like a real setting? And I promised I would show you, why is it a draw when there's a flank pawn? Well, because, you know, even if you get the opposition, you're missing a whole thing here on the left-hand side. Like, in a normal spot, you would go there, but you can't. Look, I can't. There's no extra file. So as long as the defensive side here just runs all the way back to the corner, there's no way to get it out of the... Even, look, this is a draw, okay? Even this position is a draw, because there's just no way to get the king out of the corner. I mean, it's just impossible. Same goes if the king is on the h-file. So this opposition, the outflank, is going to be the backbone of your understanding, but now we're going to add extra layers so you get some of the more advanced concepts of king and pawn endgames, okay? For example, I have this position for you. It's 2-2. Here, there's no real, I mean, you know, okay, I learned king and pawn, Levy taught me in this video, but how am I gonna win this position? Well, here, it's white to move, and what you can do is you can pause, okay? You can pause and try to figure it out yourself. I'm gonna give you a few seconds, and now I'm gonna get into it. This is a concept called, it's a little bit more advanced version of outflanking, something that you learned last example. It's something called outflanking. And essentially, you're going to use your king's advantage of quicker access around to body the other king in the right direction. You want your king to win these two pawns. Sorry, these two pawns. So instead of king e3, you're going to go king d3. Why? What if the king comes closer? Not king d4, king c4. Why? Because if you go to d4, opposition, and you bet you ain't getting in here. Ain't nobody getting to those squares. So you go to c4 because now you get the opposition. You waste a move to get the opposition. This is important because if the king goes just back, you get in. King comes back, you get in. Right? And now you've pried away the king from the defense. Bang, bang. 2 pawns up, easy. I mean, 2 pawns up, you should be winning like this. But 1 pawn is tricky. And now, once you get the opposition, if the king goes there, you go here. You gobble, gobble. If the king goes here, another outflank. And then you get close and the whole same kind of technique. King d6. King here. You say, well, Levy, this is opposition. It's a draw. No, it's not. You got 2 pawns. What are you talking about? I just showed you something with 1 pawn. 2 pawns, it doesn't matter. 2 pawns up is 2 pawns up, unless they're doubled on the h-file. So that's outflanking. The next example is actually kind of fascinating. This is winning for white. As stupid as it looked. Now you think, how's it winning? Oh, easy. Bang, 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 push pawn. Yeah, hold on. How many square? What? No, that's a terrible idea. Listen to me. Here, there's a new concept called shouldering, which is when your king kind of doesn't shove the other king out of the way by forcing it to move. It doesn't even let it get close in the first place. Shout out to Chael Sonnen. I can't let you get close. What you do in this position is you play the move King B1, which to the uninitiated looks like it doesn't make any sense. Let me show you why. If this king tries to run this way, we go here. If the king tries to get close, we go here. Our king bodies the other king away. This is very useful. It's a concept you will come across many times. And now, if like the king tries to continue, we go king d4, king f5, the process continues, and even here it looks like we finally can go here. No, we can't, because if we run this way, the king's getting over here, and it's gonna stop our pawn. So we waste 1 more move. Not waste, I mean, it's the right move. King d5, and only now, and only now have we gotten close enough to the pawn that we can win it. And by the way, you know what the trickiest thing about this position is? You still can't go for this pawn. You use shouldering, and now you push your pawn. Because you're gonna win this pawn. You will win it. It's not going anywhere. A, king can't get close. Shouldering. King c7. Now you can take, but b5. Why do you have to take? Now black says b6. You got to take my pawn now. So, all right, cool. King wants to get in here. Do we play king c6? Red carpet. Bam. Pawn's good. Shouldering. It's another technique. It will come across not just in a study position. This position is called a study position. You know, it's like a specific educational example of how to demonstrate like the maximum, but you're going to get this anyway. This is like the ultimate study example to show the maximum effect of shouldering technique. But you're going to get this in games where your king has to box out the other king. And this is important for rook endgames, but for now, you have shouldering. I have a good one for you. This is taking opposition to the next level. This is called distant opposition. Opposition traditionally is defined as, you know, if you look in it's like a certain amount of rows between the kings. You know, generally when the kings are that close, it's like 1, but sometimes it can be 3. It can be 3. That's also considered opposition. And normally you would think, well, this is easy. I just go here and here and here. Okay, and then you play king e4 and black plays king e6 and says, what are you, stupid? Did you not watch the Gothamchess YouTube video about opposition? The right move is king e3, because now it's distant opposition. Anywhere the king goes, you have a response. These two, I mostly drew for aesthetic effect. But in reality, it's the others. King d7, king f4. Because I just want to show that king f3 now, there's just king d6, and probably you will race to each other's pawns. In reality, it's more like these 3 moves. These two, I just wanted to draw something pretty. King d7 has given you the right of way to this pawn. Now we'll get king e6, king g5, king d5, king h5, king c4, king g5, king b4, h5, king c4, h6, b4, h7, b3, h8, and b2 is not possible because of this. And even if it was, you'll have to watch my other video on queen versus 1 pawn endgames, which at the time of making this isn't even out yet. But it will be. Promise. That's how you do it. You go all the way back here, you create the distant opposition, and if I go here, king e4, and now I have to give you right of way to one of the pawns, and you'll get them. Okay, so distant opposition is something that will also come up. It's a little bit harder to fully grasp, but with practice, you should be able to do it. Okay? Just, there's many examples of endgame practice, and like I said that at the end, I would give you my favorite endgame book. I'm going to put a practical example here on the screen from a game that I actually had myself. Here's the position. I recommend here you pause. And you say, well, obviously, you know, you're looking at this because it's a king and pawn endgame video. Now, the way I would give this to my students is I would say, does bishop e7 win? Or is it still a draw? Of course, if you don't take, in a practical game, black moves the knight and, you know, look at black's pawns. And look at white's bishop. That bishop doesn't see any single one of those pawns because they're all on light squares. The question is this winning? And if it's winning, how? Now, the way you solve this, you pause the video right now, but not yet because I need to tell you the instructions, and you write out variations. That is the way you solve chess positions. You write down, I'm going to go here, they're going to go here, I'm going to do this, they're going to do this, On the second move, what if they don't do this? Okay. Because you know black's first move, it's going to be to take back the bishop, right? So that's how you do it. And the big question there is, do you go this way or this way? Now, I'm going to tell you. If you go bishop e7, king e7, king c5, it looks like you're winning. Because you're going to get this pawn and then you're going to promote. The problem is, here I'm introducing a new concept known as breakthroughs. Sometimes in king and pawn endgames, there are 2 pawns versus 1. Does that give you a hint? Look around. This is the only black pawn that can move. And if it goes here, you lose. You lose. Sorry. Not even drawing, you lose because you don't have enough time to get these pawns. And and I'm threatening to take you, so if you take me, bang, nobody can stop me. Bang, bang, bang. Okay, just don't do something silly. Stop the pawn. Queen, and that's it. So you have to keep this in mind. It's not just kings. Pawns can be useful as well. G5. So then how do you win? By moving to the center. Again, opposition. The whole thing, the whole lesson today, guys, was about opposition. King to e5. Of course, g5 now doesn't work because we are in the square. This is a big square. Okay, that's 4, so, you know, we're talking something like this. Like, the king is definitely in the square. So this is just winning. King e5, and wherever the king goes, we'll go the other way. So, for example, king f7 is actually slightly more advanced, but first, we'll look at king d7. King d7 is easy peasy. Here, 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 right? Oop, sorry. Easy. King f7 is a little harder. Why? Because, again, remember this. What's the problem with this? What's the problem? g5. You lost again. Come on, man. Come on. I just said don't. So what do? How's it winning? f4. We're going to use this pawn. We're going to use this pawn as the game changer because there's no more g5. So, for example, if take, we have the more active king. King activity is so essential, as you've seen through all these examples. The side with the more active king has a big advantage. Big advantage. And even if the pawn isn't taken like this, okay, great! Great! We got rid of the pawn. Now we probably can do this. Because let's see, king d6, king f5, king c6, king g4, king b6, king h4, king a6, like king moves somewhere. Like king b5, h4, a6, h3, a7, h2. Oh. Well, that's a good note to end on, I think. That you can also convert positions from endgames into winning king and pawn positions. Or potentially drawn ones, depending on what side of the game you find yourself on. Now, these were just some concepts of king and pawn endgames. The best thing to do is to get a book. Or if you have a chess.com membership, there's a massive, I can put a link in the description. They have like a massive endgame drill section. I'm sure there's some available on Lichess as well. Whatever. The point is you got to practice. You got to practice this thing. You got to sit there. You got to calculate. Do not play. Oh my goodness. I'm going to go full screen for this because I cannot stress this enough. When you solve endgames, you better not play moves and then figure it out. You got to visualize everything from a distance. Everything. You need to see 5-6 moves ahead. It's going to be hard at first, but that's chess. Chess is hard. I could end the video there. I could have started and ended the video on just that statement. You gotta force yourself to do the work if you want to get good at king and pawn endgames, because then we're gonna start adding more pieces. Knights, bishops, rooks, queens, etc. My favorite endgame book. Okay? My favorite endgame book, one that changed my life. Not quite that dramatic, but 100 Endgames You Must Know by Jesus, I believe, De La Villa, or maybe De Villa. But fantastic book. I remember I got it when I was like 1900, because I knew my basics, but I didn't know my deep rook end games, all this stuff. And I read it on a trip to the Dominican Republic, because I'm a freaking chess nerd, and I can't spend more than 30 minutes in the sun or I turn completely red. I remember I was laying there in a shirt and a hat in the Dominican Republic. It was too hot. I'm sitting there reading my endgames book on La Playa. So that was fun. Learned about rook endgames, pawn endgames, learned to checkmate with knight and bishop in that book. Fantastic book. Highly recommend. Not sponsored or anything like that, but that's the book that everybody always asks for endgames or just books in general. That book is fantastic. So look, if you've made it this far in the video, leave me a comment with what endgames you want me to look at, and yeah, just click the thumbs up thing and subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you in the next endgame video.